The hotel had been operating for 9 years. It was a 3-story budget establishment located off a highway exit that served travelers looking for basic accommodations at minimal cost. The building had 68 rooms spread across 3 floors. Standard amenities: continental breakfast in the lobby, free parking, Wi-Fi in common areas. The kind of place that showed up in online searches when people filtered by price rather than reviews. The ownership structure was simple on paper: a limited liability company registered in the state, a managing partner who handled daily operations, annual occupancy rates that were respectable for a budget property in a location that wasn't a major tourist destination but saw consistent traffic from commercial drivers, families on road trips, and workers in town for short-term job assignments. The property had no history of code violations. No complaints beyond the occasional noise dispute or maintenance issue that any hotel might experience. Inspections by health and safety officials found minor issues that were promptly corrected. The hotel paid its taxes, maintained its licenses, and operated within the legal framework that governed hospitality businesses. The investigation began 6 months earlier when a woman walked into a police station 3 states away and reported that she had been held against her will at a hotel for 2 weeks before managing to escape. Her account described being recruited for what was presented as legitimate hospitality work. She was transported to the hotel and told she would be working as a housekeeper. Instead, she was locked in a room, her identification was taken, and she was told she owed money for transportation and housing that would be deducted from future wages. When those wages never materialized and she realized she was being held indefinitely, she managed to slip out during a brief moment when her room door was left unlocked while housekeeping supplies were being delivered. She hid in a utility closet until she could access an emergency exit without being seen. She walked 6 miles to a gas station and called police. Her story was credible but difficult to verify. She didn't know exactly where the hotel was located. She had been transported at night and kept in a room without windows. She knew it was near a highway because she could hear truck traffic constantly. She knew it was a 3-story building because she had glimpsed the exterior during her escape. And she knew there were other people in similar situations because she had heard voices and movement in adjacent rooms. Federal investigators took the case because the recruitment had occurred across state lines. They worked backwards from the woman's description and timeline. Hotels near highway exits within the regional area that matched her description. Properties that had characteristics consistent with what she remembered. Eventually, they identified 12 possible locations. Surveillance was established on all 12 properties. Most were ruled out quickly. High occupancy rates with obvious turnover, visible guest activity, normal hospitality operations. But 3 properties showed patterns that were unusual. Low visible occupancy despite financial records showing consistent revenue. Limited guest traffic in and out of the building. And in one case, rooms on the 3rd floor that appeared occupied based on utility usage but showed no visible guest activity. That property became the primary focus. Additional surveillance confirmed the pattern. The 1st and 2nd floors operated as a normal budget hotel. Guests checked in and out. Housekeeping moved through the corridors. The lobby had the standard flow of people you would expect at any functioning hotel. But the 3rd floor was different. Rooms showed as occupied in the hotel management system, but nobody entered or exited those rooms through normal guest patterns. Digital forensics on the hotel's reservation system revealed something unusual. The 3rd floor rooms were blocked in the system as long-term corporate rentals that didn't appear in public booking platforms. The rooms were marked as occupied permanently, preventing guests from reserving them through standard channels. But there were no corporate accounts associated with these reservations. No company names, no business contracts, just room numbers marked as unavailable for public booking. The property also showed unusual staffing patterns. Standard hospitality operations require housekeeping, front desk personnel, maintenance workers, and management. This hotel employed all of those positions. but it also had security personnel on overnight shifts that weren't typical for budget properties. 2 to 3 individuals working overnight who weren't listed as front desk staff or maintenance. They were designated simply as security in payroll records. Federal agents obtained financial records through subpoena. The hotel generated revenue at levels consistent with full occupancy, but the bookings didn't align with guest traffic. Money was moving through the business in amounts that exceeded what visible operations would justify. Wire transfers came from sources that investigators couldn't immediately connect to legitimate hospitality operations. The warrant was issued based on probable cause that the property was being used for human trafficking, and that evidence of these operations would be found on premises, specifically on the 3rd floor where rooms were blocked from public access but showed signs of occupancy. The tactical plan was complex because the property had legitimate guests on the 1st and 2nd floors who needed to be protected during the operation. Those guests were unaware they were staying at a hotel where the 3rd floor was being used for criminal purposes. They couldn't be evacuated before the operation without alerting the subjects operating the confinement operation. SWAT was requested because the hotel's layout created challenges. 3 floors with central stairwells and elevators. Multiple rooms per floor. Unknown number of subjects who might resist. Unknown number of victims who might be held in locked rooms. And legitimate guests who needed to be secured without exposing them to tactical operations. The entry was planned for 4:30 a.m. on a Thursday, early enough that most guests would be asleep, late enough that overnight security personnel would still be on duty. Intelligence suggested 3 to 5 subjects would be present during overnight hours. The managing partner who ran daily operations typically arrived around 8:00 a.m., so the early morning timing would reduce the likelihood of encountering leadership before the property was secured. 22 tactical operators divided into 4 teams. Primary team responsible for securing the lobby and 1st floor. Second team assigned to secure the 2nd floor and ensure guest safety. Third team would proceed directly to the 3rd floor and begin clearing rooms where victims might be held. Fourth team would establish perimeter security to prevent anyone from fleeing the property. At 4:27 a.m., teams moved into position. The hotel sat on a 2-acre lot with parking areas surrounding the building. The only vehicle access was through the main entrance off the highway service road. Perimeter units blocked this access before the primary entry began. At 4:31 a.m., the lobby entry team breached the main entrance. 2 individuals were at the front desk. Both were detained within seconds without resistance. The overnight security personnel attempted to access a back office area but were intercepted by operators before they could reach whatever they were trying to secure. The 1st and 2nd floor teams moved simultaneously. Each floor had 23 rooms. Officers went door to door announcing law enforcement presence and instructing guests to remain in their rooms until given clearance. Most guests complied immediately. A few opened doors asking what was happening. Officers explained there was a law enforcement operation in progress and that the 3rd floor team ascended the central stairwell and entered the 3rd floor corridor at 4:34 a.m. The layout was identical to the floors below. 22 rooms plus utility areas and housekeeping storage. But the atmosphere was different. The corridor smelled stale. Several ceiling lights were out, creating sections of deep shadow. And most significantly, many of the room doors had been modified with external deadbolt locks that could. The 1st room was locked from outside. Operators forced entry. Inside were 4 people, 3 women and 1 man. Ages approximately mid-20s to mid-30s. They were on 2 beds in a room that showed signs of extended occupancy. Clothing hung on a rack in the corner. Personal items were minimal but present. The television was on with the volume muted. When operators entered, none of the occupants moved toward the door. No rushing to escape, no expressions of relief. Just blank stares and a kind of resigned stillness that suggested this wasn't the first time their room had been entered unexpectedly by authority figures. An operator asked in English if anyone was injured. No response. Asked if anyone spoke English. One woman nodded slightly. The operator explained they were federal agents executing a warrant and that everyone was safe. The woman's expression didn't change. She asked quietly if they were going to be deported. The operator explained that wasn't the immediate concern and that they needed medical assessment first. The second room held 3 people. Similar conditions. Extended occupancy indicators. External lock that prevented exit. Occupants who showed no enthusiasm about being discovered by law enforcement. The same questions about deportation and arrest. The same resigned acceptance that whatever was about to happen was beyond their control. The third room held 5 people. The fourth held 6. The fifth held 4. By the time the first sweep of the third floor was complete, operators had found 53 individuals in 12 rooms. All of them were adults. All showed signs of extended confinement. None of them had keys to their rooms. None of them had phones or personal electronics. Most had minimal personal belongings beyond basic clothing. Medical teams were called to the scene immediately. Victim advocates were notified. Translation services were requested for multiple languages. The hotel lobby was converted into a triage and assessment area. The 53 individuals from the third floor were brought down systematically and provided with medical screening, food, water, and initial interviews by federal agents. While this processing was happening, investigators began examining the third floor rooms more carefully. In one of the housekeeping closets, they found a clipboard with room assignments and occupancy counts. The document listed not 53 people, but 67. Operators conducted a second sweep of the third floor. They checked every room again, examined utility areas, looked in maintenance spaces. The count remained at 53. One of the detained security personnel was questioned. Initially, he refused to answer. When confronted with a discrepancy between the clipboard count and the actual people found, he eventually indicated that some rooms had been cleared yesterday in preparation for rotation. When pressed on what rotation meant, he explained that people were being moved out to make room for new arrivals. The investigator asked where those 14 people had been moved to. The security guard didn't know specific locations but mentioned they were in the system and would be transferred today. When asked what time the transfer was scheduled, he checked his watch and said the vans were coming at 10:30 a.m. The time was now 6:18 a.m. The 14 missing people were scheduled to be picked up and transported in 4 hours and 12 minutes. They weren't in the hotel because they had been moved to a secondary location pending transfer, but nobody knew where that location was, and the security guard genuinely didn't have that information. He had been told they were moved. He knew they were being picked up today, but the actual holding location and transport details were handled by management above his level. The managing partner was the next priority. He lived in a residence 8 miles from the hotel. Federal agents were dispatched to his home at 6:25 a.m. He was arrested at 6:51 a.m. while attempting to leave his property. His phone showed recent text messages discussing the morning's scheduled pickup. The messages referenced a staging location, but used addresses in numeric code rather than explicit location information. While agents worked to decode the addresses, investigators at the hotel found a laptop in the manager's office. The device was password protected, but digital forensics specialists were able to bypass the security. The laptop contained spreadsheets tracking occupancy across multiple properties, not just the hotel, at least 4 other locations in the region. One spreadsheet was labeled Thursday Transfer Schedule. It listed 14 names with associated identification numbers. Those numbers matched entries on the clipboard found in the third-floor housekeeping closet. Next to each name was a pickup time, 10:30 a.m., and a departure location code, SL7. Investigators cross-referenced SL7 with other documents on the laptop. The code corresponded to a property address, a warehouse facility 12 miles from the hotel in an industrial area near the city's freight rail yards. Tactical teams were immediately redirected to the warehouse location. The time was now 7:34 a.m. The scheduled pickup was at 10:30 a.m. That left 2 hours and 56 minutes to locate the 14 people, secure the warehouse, and prevent the transfer vehicles from either completing the pickup or disappearing if they received warning that the operation had been compromised. The warehouse address led to a commercial property that was registered to a different limited liability company, but shared officers with the hotel's ownership structure. The building was a 40,000 square foot facility that appeared to handle legitimate freight forwarding and storage operations during normal business hours. Surveillance from outside showed limited activity. One vehicle in the parking area. No visible movement in or around the building. Thermal imaging detected heat signatures inside consistent with multiple people in a section of the building away from the main loading dock area. The tactical entry was planned for 8:12 a.m. Operators approached the building through the loading dock area where large bay doors provided access to the interior. One door was partially open. The entry team moved through this opening and into the warehouse floor. The main space was vast and filled with commercial freight containers, storage racks, and pallets of goods awaiting shipment. The area appeared to be a functioning warehouse. Nothing immediately suggested it was being used for confinement operations. But the thermal signatures had indicated human presence in a specific section toward the rear of the building. Operators moved through the warehouse floor following the layout mapped from external thermal scans. In the rear corner, they found a section partitioned off with temporary walls, creating a separate room within the larger warehouse space. The partition had a door with an external padlock. The lock was cut and the door opened. Inside was a space approximately 20 feet by 30 feet. No windows. Minimal lighting from overhead fixtures, and 14 people sitting on the floor or on folding chairs arranged along the walls. When operators entered, the reaction was similar to what had been seen at the hotel. No rushing toward the door, no expressions of relief or celebration. Just quiet resignation and fear about what came next. These were the 14 people listed on the transfer schedule. They had been moved from the hotel the previous day and were being held in this warehouse staging area, pending pickup and transport to wherever they were being sent next in the trafficking network. All 14 were secured and evacuated from the warehouse. Medical teams provided assessment. All were dehydrated and showing signs of stress but had no acute medical emergencies. They were transported to the same facility where the 53 people from the hotel were being processed. The total count was now 67. All of the people listed in the hotel's occupancy records had been located. 34 from the hotel's third floor in the initial sweep, 19 more from additional third-floor rooms discovered during the second sweep, and 14 from the warehouse staging location. Federal investigators worked to piece together the operation's structure. The hotel had been functioning as a holding facility disguised as a legitimate business. The first and second floors operated normally to maintain the appearance of a functioning hotel and generate legitimate revenue that could be reported to authorities. The third floor was used to hold people who had been recruited under false pretenses or coerced into the trafficking network. People would be held at the hotel for periods ranging from days to months depending on when placement opportunities became available. When placements were ready, individuals would be moved to the warehouse staging location for final processing before being transported to work sites, other trafficking operations, or subsequent holding facilities. The system was designed to be invisible. The hotel looked legitimate from outside. Guests on the first and second floors had no idea the third floor was being used for confinement. Even employees who worked at the hotel weren't all aware of what was happening. Housekeeping staff were restricted from accessing the third floor. Front desk personnel were told the third floor was reserved for long-term corporate rentals that didn't require daily service. The few staff members who were involved in the operation were paid significantly more than standard hospitality wages. They were told they were helping to manage a program that provided housing and work placement for people in difficult situations. They were assured everything was legal and that participants had signed agreements authorizing the arrangement. Most didn't question the locked doors or the external security measures because they had been normalized as necessary protocols for managing vulnerable populations. The investigation revealed the network extended beyond the single hotel. The laptop seized from the managing partner's office showed at least 4 other properties being used in similar ways: hotels, motels, and residential properties where rooms or units were blocked from public access and used to hold people pending place. Coordinated raids were executed on these properties over the following 48 hours. Additional victims were located. Additional evidence was seized. The network that had been operating for years using legitimate hospitality businesses as cover for the 67 people who had been held at the hotel and warehouse, the immediate crisis was over. They had been located before the scheduled transfer. They wouldn't be loaded onto vans and transported to unknown destinations. But their medical assessments revealed widespread malnutrition, dehydration, and untreated health conditions. Psychological trauma was universal. Many had been told repeatedly that they were in the country illegally and would be arrested if they contacted authorities. Some had been threatened with harm to family members in their home countries. Others had simply been worn down by the hopelessness of their situation, and no longer. Victim services coordinated comprehensive support, emergency housing that was genuinely safe, medical care for physical and psychological needs, legal assistance for immigration matters and protection from deportation, advocacy to ensure victims understood their rights and options. The process would take months or years depending on individual circumstances. The investigation also examined how people had been recruited into the network. Many had responded to online job advertisements that promised legitimate work in hospitality, agriculture, or construction. Others had been referred by what they believed were employment agencies. Some had been recruited by individuals in their home countries who were connected to the trafficking operation. The recruitment tactics were sophisticated. Legitimate-sounding job descriptions, promises of assistance with work visas or documentation, arrangements for transportation and housing that seemed reasonable. Nothing in the initial contact suggested exploitation. The shift from legitimate job opportunity to coerced confinement happened gradually after people arrived and found themselves dependent on the network for housing, documentation, and the promise of work that never materialized. The financial investigation showed the operation had generated substantial revenue over 9 years. The hotel's legitimate business provided cover and some income. But the real profits came from placement fees charged to businesses that received workers through the network and from debt manipulation that kept victims trapped, even if they were technically being paid for work. The managing partner was charged with federal trafficking offenses, conspiracy, forced labor, and money laundering. The hotel's ownership structure was penetrated to identify additional individuals involved in leadership roles. Security personnel who had actively participated in confinement operations faced charges. Even some staff members who had limited awareness but had contributed to the operation through their daily duties were investigated, though most were determined to be victims of. The hotel property was seized under asset forfeiture laws. The building that had functioned as both a legitimate business and a confinement facility was closed permanently. The structure would eventually be sold and the proceeds would contribute to victim compensation funds. But the damage to the hospitality industry's reputation in the area was significant. Other budget hotels faced increased scrutiny and suspicion from travelers who worried about what might be happening. For the tactical teams who executed the operation, the scale of the discovery was sobering. Walking into a hotel that looked completely normal from outside and finding 53 people locked in third-floor rooms. Discovering documentation showing 14 more people who had been moved just before the raid. Racing against a 4-hour window to locate those people before they were transferred out of reach. And ultimately preventing that transfer by finding the warehouse staging location with less than 3 hours to spare. The operation timeline was critical. If the raid had been scheduled for later in the morning, the 14 people in the warehouse would have been gone by the time operators arrived. The vans were scheduled for 10:30 a.m. pickup. The warehouse raid occurred at 8:12 a.m. The margin was 2 hours and 18 minutes. In trafficking operations, a delay of even a few hours can mean the difference between rescue and permanent disappearance into a network where victims become exponentially harder to locate. The coordination between the hotel raid and the warehouse raid was essential. Neither operation would have been fully successful without the other. Finding 53 people at the hotel was significant, but 14 remained at risk. Identifying the warehouse through the laptop evidence and executing the secondary raid before the scheduled transfer prevented those 14 people. For investigators, the case reinforced the reality that trafficking operations can exist within legitimate business structures for years without detection. The hotel had operated for 9 years. Thousands of legitimate guests had stayed on the first and second floors without knowing what was happening one floor above them. Employees had worked at the property without full awareness of the operation. The business had passed inspections and maintained the invisibility was intentional. The operation was designed to hide behind normalcy. The third-floor rooms could have been explained as corporate rentals if questioned. The external locks could have been justified as security measures. The lack of guest turnover on that floor could have been attributed to long-term occupancy. Every element had a plausible, legitimate explanation if examined superficially. Only sustained investigation revealed the truth. The pattern of people disappearing after arriving for supposed job opportunities. The woman who escaped and reported her experience. The surveillance that showed occupancy patterns inconsistent with normal hotel operations. The financial records that didn't align with visible guest traffic. And ultimately the warrant that allowed tactical teams to enter and discover what was behind the locked doors on the third floor. The 67 people who were held in that system are now in various stages of recovery. Some have returned to their home countries with assistance from victim services. Others have remained in the United States pursuing legal immigration status or asylum based on their trafficking experience. Several have become advocates, sharing their stories to help others recognize recruitment tactics and escape situations before they become trapped. The hotel building remains closed. The property that once operated as both a legitimate business and a confinement facility now sits empty with signs warning of no trespassing. Local residents drive past it every day, many unaware of what was discovered there and what it represented about the hidden operations that can exist in plain sight within their communities. For law enforcement, the case remains a reference for investigating businesses that might be serving dual purposes. The importance of examining not just what's visible, but what patterns suggest might be hidden. The value of listening to victims who escape and report their experiences even when corroboration is difficult. And the necessity of coordinated tactical operations that can move quickly when evidence reveals time-sensitive situations where victims are about to be transferred beyond reach. The operation began at 4:31 a.m. with entry into a hotel lobby. It expanded to include 67 people held across 2 locations. And it concluded at 8:12 a.m. with a warehouse raid that prevented a scheduled transfer by just over 2 hours. Those hours made the difference between rescue and disappearance for 14 people who were sitting in a partitioned room waiting for vans that would have taken them to the next unknown destination in a network that had controlled their lives and stolen their freedom.